Well, good evening. How's everybody doing tonight? So it's funny, I was sharing this with somebody else earlier when I saw Pastor Mike, which, by the way, give it up for Pastor Mike. This guy is ridiculous. And when I saw him yesterday, I was walking in the door on the side of the building, and he said, "Oh, you're the person I was waiting for." And I could tell on his face, he was about to ask me to come speak here. I don't know, I just knew it. And so it was like I was a little kid. I couldn't wait for him to get it out of his mouth. I'm like, "Yeah, uh-huh." He's like, "Will you?" And I was like, "You had me at will you." Okay, here we go. So I absolutely love this group. You guys are my favorite group in the entire church, okay? And it's because you're just so awesome, and because you're so hungry and excitable about what God is doing. Man, worship, was that not ridiculous? I was in tears over here on the front just thinking about how good God is and the fact that we get to come together and worship Him. Here's the awesome thing about worship, friends. When we're standing before the throne of God, we're all just equals. We're all just people that come to our awesome Heavenly Father. Doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter how much money's in your bank account, doesn't matter how many successes you have or failures you have. You're a child of God that gets to worship our Heavenly Father. And that's why it feels so good when we come together for worship. You guys felt that, right? Yeah, it's so exciting. But I want to jump in because I know I only have 3 hours, so I got to do quickly here. I don't think I've ever finished on time. Pastor Mike, what time do I need to be done?
Probably by
8:30. 8:30. Okay, we got to talk fast, friends. Okay, so I don't know about you, but I don't like to wait for anything. I have a really hard time with that waiting period. Anybody else the same as me in the room? Okay. And I know Pastor Mike started a series last week about being in that waiting moment. I hate it. In fact, I'd never do this, and she's going to kill me, but my wife, Christy, will you please wave your hand at everybody? This is Christy. And, of course, my two wonderful daughters, Ava and Aaliyah, are next to her. But when I started dating Christy, I knew right away I was going to marry her. I mean, listen to this. Yeah, for real. We started dating in August, got engaged in December, and married in May. That's fast, right? Now, granted, I was already almost 27 years old, and I was done with the whole dating game and whatever else. But still, the moment I knew her and understood who she was, I was like, yep, that's what I want the rest of my life to look like. And so I saved up money, I got the engagement ring, and I got it in the middle of December. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to wait till the springtime, and this is going to be so beautiful. I got this great plan. This was before all y'all started doing hey, we got to have 25 photographers come and do this big stuff. No, back in our days, we just got engaged, right? But I had it all planned out until that night when I got to her house. Then I ran up to her dad. I'm like, "Hey, tomorrow Christy and I are going on a date. Can I ask her to marry me?" He's like, "Yeah, sure." I'm like, "Cool." So the next day I got engaged. Because how am I going to wait for several months when I know something awesome is going to happen? That's just not me. And so when there's these moments where I'm waiting and waiting and waiting for something to take place and I don't see the answer, it kills me. Anybody else with me? I cannot stand it. And then I think of people like David. Turn your Bibles real quick to Psalm chapter 13. This is how David talks about his waiting moments. And maybe you can relate to this. He says, "How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death." That's pretty dramatic. "And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall." Anybody relate to those words a little bit? I don't know about you, but I've been in a season right now that God has kind of put me in this idling pattern where life was moving forward and I saw all these great things happening and I was so excited, and then it was all at once He just shifted into neutral. And there I was, just coasting, or should I say, here I am in this moment that feels like a coasting moment. And I'll tell you what, it's the worst feeling I've ever had in my life. Because I wake up daily and I say to God, "God, do you even hear what I'm saying? Because I'm waiting. And I know you're faithful, and I know you're good, and I know all the things that I've had to preach to everybody else. But I just don't feel it right this minute. Because how long, Lord? How long until you actually answer me? How long until I see the result that I'm looking for? How long, Lord? And David's in that spot in this psalm, and I wonder what can we do in moments where we feel like God's just not answering? Where we feel like he's left us and we're just there to figure it out on our own. Now, to be honest, most of us in this room, if we know anything about God, we know that's not true, right? Raise your hand if you know that's not true. Okay. But put that hand back up for a second. If you know that's not true, put up your other hand, though, if you have to convince yourself of that sometimes. Come on. Why is that? Why is it that we can believe God to be true all the time until, here's the funny thing. I was saying this to somebody the other day. I can look back and say, ooh, look where God was faithful here. 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 This will probably be the time that he's not faithful. It's easy to laugh at, but let's be honest. You've done it too, haven't you? Where you know he's faithful, you know he's good, but for some reason, this is probably going to be the time where he doesn't answer. It's not true, friends, because if he always answers, guess what he does? He always answers. But we can convince ourselves that this is it. Nothing else is going to happen. I want to read a story tonight and kind of jump through a couple of texts. So if you have some notes, write quickly, just so you know. I've done some work in this conversation to compile some of the Gospels together and get a timeline going for us. So I'm going to talk through the story of Peter walking on water. I just told Melvin, it's so funny that he sang that song at the end of worship because I hadn't heard that song in forever. And as I was preparing tonight, I was like, what's it look like for God to call us out on water, that things that we don't understand? And then he sang that song, and I was like, okay, I guess here we go. So Matthew chapter 14, go here. I'm going to read this text, and then I want to jump backwards and kind of give you some of the pieces to it. So we're going to start in verse 22. And the very first word of chapter 14, verse 22 is immediately. Just so you know, anytime you see a word like therefore, or because of this, or then, or immediately, that tells you something else just took place. We're going to get to that in just a minute, so just bear with me because it's super important on what happened. But immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land. It was buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Lord, if it is you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? Well, probably because he's standing on water and there's waves coming at him and there's wind blowing, right? Like, this story has been so fascinating to me over the years because, first of all, let me make some observations here. Who was it that decided he should go out and walk on the water? Peter. You ever thought about why? I mean, Peter, you're in a perfectly good boat. Who cares if there's wind and waves? You're in a boat right now. What makes you think that this scary figure out on the water that you thought was a ghost a second ago, that it would be a smart idea to say, let me go out to him on the water? Something that's never been done by a human being before. Peter thought, yep, that's the thing I'm going to do today. Why? Well, it's because I believe, and here's something for you to write down. He had this question in his mind. Will he do it for me? Will he do it for me? I want to take you on a journey starting in Luke chapter 7, verses 18 through 19, because I got to give you some backstory to what just happened right before this. You see, Jesus' disciples were going around doing amazing things, and God was with them, and Jesus was healing people. The sick were being healed, and the blind were being able to see, and the lame were able to walk. And word got around. In fact, word got around to a prison cell where a man named John was. Now, John, known as John the Baptist, was also a relative of Jesus. We don't know exact relative. He was some sort of distant cousin or something like that. And John had one purpose. His purpose was to prepare the way for the Messiah. In fact, if you don't know this, one day John even got to baptize Jesus. And as he baptized him into the water, right there in front of them all, as Jesus came back up, he saw the Spirit of God descend like a dove and land on Jesus. Then he heard the voice of God Almighty say, "This is my Son, who I am well pleased." And John the Baptist was right there watching this happen. So John knew without a doubt, this is the Messiah. This is the one I've been preparing for. Here he is. But then John gets arrested, you see, because he talked out against Herod and some things that were happening with him marrying his brother Philip's wife. And he just said, this is wrong. God doesn't like this. And so he had John arrested. And then one day he threw him in prison. And we'll get to the rest of the story in just a second. But here John is sitting in this prison cell. And I just imagine him thinking, what is that Messiah doing right now? And as he's sitting there in this cell where nothing seems to be right for him, his disciples come to him and he says to them, hey, go talk to Jesus, will you? Go and ask him this question. And here's the question that we find, and it's in Luke chapter 7, verse 18. It says, he sent them to the Lord to ask, are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else? Are you the one that we've been looking for, or should we just wait for somebody else? Why is he asking that? Well, he's asking that because his situation doesn't make sense. And he thought the Messiah was going to make it all make sense for him in that moment. And so his disciples go to Jesus and they say, hey, John wants to know, are you the one or should we wait for somebody else? And Jesus says this, he says, go back and tell him this. The lame walk, the blind see, there's freedom for the oppressed. Tell him these things. And so they leave him, and what Jesus was doing there is he was talking about the prophecy that can be found in Isaiah chapter 61, verse 1, that says this, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, and to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So what John was asking is, are you the Messiah? And what Jesus answered is, yeah, I'm doing all the things that were prophesied in the book of Isaiah. But why was John asking that? He didn't really want to know if he was the Messiah. He wanted to know, are you going to do something for me? Because right now I'm in a prison cell, and I didn't sign up for this. I mean, I've already lived in the wilderness. I've eaten honey and I've eaten locusts as my meal. And now I'm in a prison cell where there's nobody bringing me anything. And he wanted to know, are you going to save me or not? Well, okay, so that's happening. And while that's happening, listen to what's taking place everywhere else. You see, the disciples, Jesus calls them together in Mark 6, verse 6. And he says this, Jesus went around teaching from village to village, calling the 12 to him. He began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over impure spirits. So they go out, Jesus tells them, come together, here we go, guys. I'm going to give you the power to go do the same things I'm doing. So you saw the lame walk, you see the blind see, you see the oppressed free, go do the same. So the disciples get sent out, and they go, and they do the work of God. Well, while that's taking place, I'm just building the layers for you, okay? While that's taking place, what we read in Matthew 14, verse 8, Herod's daughter-in-law, Herod's stepdaughter, is at a party one night and is dancing, and Herod loves it. And he says, what can I do to pay you so that you will dance in front of everybody? And her mother, the one that John the Baptist was talking out against, says, hey, why don't you tell him this? We want John the Baptist's head on a platter. And so she turns to him and says, well, what I want is John the Baptist's head on a platter. And so because of his love for her mother, he sends people down to the prison cell to pull John out, chop his head off, put it on a platter, and brings it up for all the people to see. So while the disciples are over here and the lame are walking and the blind can see and the oppressed are free, over here's John saying, wait a minute, were you the Messiah? Because I asked you if you'd do this. Now, the funny thing is the disciples that are now out doing all these great things were right there when John's disciples came and asked him this question. So can you imagine the thought of the disciples as they walk out to do these powerful works of God? They're thinking, man, why didn't he tell us to go save John? Oh, well, let's go do this. But what about John? And so while they're doing these great things and John's getting beheaded, story is coming together. You see, here's what happens next. You could go to the book of Mark 6:29. On hearing this, John's disciples came, and they took his body, and they laid it in a tomb. Now get the contrasting stories right now, because the disciples are out doing the work of God, and it's awesome. Because they're seeing the same things take place that Jesus saw happen. And John's disciples are carrying a headless body through the streets. They're taking it to a tomb to bury it. Here's why this is important, because in just a second, both of these parties are going to come together into the same place. You see, when you go to the book of Mark chapter 6, verse 30, the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. They must have been so excited. They come to Jesus. Jesus, check this out. We said for somebody to get up and walk, and they did it. Jesus, check this out. There was these people that were just oppressed, and we prayed over them, and they were free. And they're just so excited, and they probably forgot that Jesus didn't go and help John, because now they're just so excited about what is happening. And while they're telling Jesus what they were able to do, listen to what Matthew tells us in 14 verse 12. John's disciples came, took his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. So get the contrasting pieces here. These disciples over here are Jesus' disciples, and they're doing these great, powerful, awesome things, yet they heard Jesus say, sorry, John, I'm not coming to save you right now. John's disciples are over here saying, I know he has the power to do it, but he hasn't done it yet, and now look, we had to bury John the Baptist. And they both come together at the same place at the same time with completely contrasting stories. And so listen to what Jesus does next. Because when the report comes to Jesus, Matthew 14, verse 13 says, when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat to a solitary place. But we got to go to Mark to hear a little bit more of the story, because Mark 6:31 tells us, because so many people were coming and going, they did not have a chance to eat. He said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. Okay, so I'm just taking the gospel pieces and putting them together. Everybody with me? Making sense so far? Because the gospel writers wrote from different perspectives, so they don't write all the pieces together, but when you do the timeline, you see how they fit together. And so John's disciples, Jesus' disciples come and tell him the story, and Jesus says, let's go be alone. This is too much. Now listen to what happens. We read in Mark 6:35 or Matthew 14:15, the same story. And it says this, the crowds followed them. The disciples tried to send them away, but Jesus had compassion on them. And this is the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. If you haven't heard this, it's an amazing story. I encourage you to read it later. I don't have time for it. But here's what essentially happens. As Jesus is having compassion and loving on them and taking care of them, like the nighttime is coming and they're in a remote place. And so the disciples come to Jesus and say, hey, Jesus, send these people away. Like, it's night, they got to eat, there's nothing here, just send them away. And in both Mark and Matthew, Jesus tells them the same thing. Do you know what it is? You give them something to eat. Now think about this for a second, because when we read in Mark just a second ago, Jesus said to them, Mark tells us, because they had not had anything to eat yet, Jesus says, let's go away to a quiet place. So here's these starving disciples that have been working hard and have seen these miracles happen, yet have had this letdown of John dying and wondering why Jesus didn't save him, and they haven't eaten. And Jesus says, you go feed them. And they don't know what to do. And so Jesus has to make it happen. Here's what happens next. And I'm just giving you the pieces. You have to go read these stories so you can understand what I'm saying. So then it says that Jesus puts them in a boat. In fact, I actually have to read this part to you. Excuse me. Matthew 14, go to verse 22 and 23. No, I'm sorry. Am I in the right place? Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Verse number 21. Nope, wow, I am way off. I'm so sorry, guys. It was verse 22. I was right the first time. So after this happens, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he dismissed them, he went up on the mountainside by himself to pray. Think about how the disciples feel now. He didn't heal John. We couldn't figure out how to feed the people. Now he's sending us away by ourselves. When I read this story, do you know what I think Peter was feeling? Discouraged. Like a letdown. Like once again he failed. Like in his head, he's sitting there saying, man, can I do anything right? And then on top of that, he's looking at the fact that, Jesus, you had the chance to go save John. You're the Messiah. You're causing people that couldn't walk since birth to get up and use their legs. I think you could break open a prison door. Yet you let John stay in there. Now, John's beheaded. And I think Peter sat there saying, I wonder if he'll do it for me. Or am I going to be let down just like John was? And if I'm being honest, the hardest part of the waiting period is that battle of saying, is he going to remember me? Or am I going to be let down? Is he going to take care of this and bring resolution? Or am I always just going to be here hoping and wondering and waiting and never get answered? And so Peter sees the ghost-like figure coming out on the waters. And Jesus doesn't call him there. He puts it in himself to say, if it really is you, call me out. Why? Because he wanted to know, am I good enough? Will you do this for me? Or am I going to be just stuck like everybody else? Am I not going to be answered just like John wasn't answered? Just do it for me, Jesus. So he walks out onto the water. And after the first couple steps, this is the interesting thing. It says he saw the wind. Friends, you can't see the wind. What did he see? The effects of everything around him. Once again, he was reminded, am I good enough? Or am I just out here? And it says that he began to sink into the water, and immediately he cried out. What does he say? Lord, save me. Now here's the best part of the story. Lord, save me. Verse 31, chapter 14 of the book of Matthew. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. How long did it take him? No time at all. In fact, we don't know the distance between the two of them. If he was right next to Jesus, he would have just reached out and tried to grab Jesus himself. But Jesus seemed a distance away for Peter. So he had to cry out to him. And in this separation where he felt like he was away from Jesus, where he felt like, will he answer me? Will he take care of me? All he did was call out. And immediately, somehow, Jesus was right there, ready to grab his hand and pull him back up. And he said, oh, you of little faith. Why did you doubt? What did Peter doubt? He didn't doubt Jesus. How do you know? Well, he called out to Jesus. So what did Peter doubt? Himself. Not that he had the power to do anything, but that he was good enough. Will he do it for me? Because I've been waiting a long time to know the answer to that. I mean, remember, Peter's the one that Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. because he was thinking of things of himself instead of the heavenly things. He's the same one that has all these doubts and questions about himself. And here he is standing there on the waters, getting ready to sink, and he's getting ready to get this answer. Okay, here's the test. I've been waiting. I've been wondering, Jesus, will you do it for me? Lord, save me. And in an instant, Jesus reaches out and grabs hold of him. Friends, some of you have been waiting and wondering and feeling like you've been left alone. Some of you have been struggling to understand that in the waiting time, all the thoughts that are going through your head, all the emotions that are burning through your heart, those aren't from God. That's your human flesh wrestling with what's really supposed to be happening. And God is trying to say, just wait for me. Just reach out for me. Just call for me. Because the moment you do, I'm going to reach out and grab your hand and pull you up. But we got to get past the spot of wondering, am I worth it? Will he do that for me? Because, man, I saw the worship team up here, and, man, they worship their hearts out. I'm sure he'll do it for them. I see Pastor Mike, and he walks on water in his spare time, and I'm sure he'll do it for him. Oh, man, if everybody knew what I did last night, if everybody knew just kind of the mess that I'm in at home, if everybody knew the thoughts that go through my head, if everybody knew just the doubts I have about myself, they would understand there's no way Jesus is going to look at me the same as them. Will he really do it for me too? Because I've been waiting for a long time. I've asked the same prayer over and over and over and over, and he still hasn't even answered me. Will he do it for me? Yeah. The moment you say, Lord, save me, and you allow yourself to walk out into the scariest spot you could ever be in order to be in the presence of Jesus. Because when you do that, immediately he reaches down and grabs your hand. Let me give you a couple of quick takeaways for what Jesus did, because when I look at Jesus' life, I understand how I'm supposed to live this up. Because if I want, in that waiting time, if I want to have a firm foundation to make sure I'm strong, nothing's gonna deter me. Nothing's gonna make these thoughts come alive inside of me because they're not real. They're not right. If I'm gonna get past those things, there's three things I think we need to do, and I find them in Jesus' life, and I'm gonna go through these real quickly. Number one, I gotta be prayed up. I gotta pray regularly. Listen to what happened. Jesus sent them away after all of these things to do what? It says he went up on the mountainside to be alone and pray. Friends, if you're struggling with the waiting period, if you're struggling with what's God gonna do, you better start praying. But you don't understand, I am praying. I'm saying, God, when are you gonna do this? God, what's this look? No, that's not what I'm talking about. When Jesus went away, it says he went away to be with his Father. He went away just to talk to God. My wife and I started doing something because, like I said, we are in a waiting period ourselves. So I'm not talking to you about this out of blindness. The other night, we started going on a prayer walk. So every night this last couple of nights, I was going to say this week, but that's a lie. The last couple of nights, what we started doing is we go on a walk, and I just pray out loud. And I begin to call things out, and I begin to thank God, and I begin to ask God questions, and I begin to talk to God. Why? Because there's nothing more important than being alone with God and talking with him. Can I tell you what happens when you start praying about it? You actually forget that you're in a waiting period. You begin to feel like, I'm not waiting. I know God's going to answer something, but that's not where I'm at. I'm in the presence of God. That song we sang where we're calling out the names of God, the things that God is and will do for you. Guys, how can you stay in a spot of anxiety and depression when you're singing the power of God's names over your life? And so, start praying. You know, there's 28 times in the Gospels where Jesus prays or says something about prayer. And here's the fun thing. Jesus knew about the waiting time. Do you know how I know? Because there's 9 different times in the Gospels where it specifically says, don't tell anybody it's not the right time yet. You ever heard that in the Bible? You ever wondered why? Well, because Jesus knew the outcome. He knew there was a specific day at a specific time that he was supposed to be hanging on a cross. It was always in front of him. And he waited 33 and a half years to get to that spot. You think you had to wait for a while? Imagine living 33 and a half years knowing one day you're going to hang on a cross, and every day is a countdown to it. Why do you think in the garden he got on his knees and said, Father, if there's any other way, let this pass. But not my will, but your will be done. He did it because for 33 and a half years he had to sit there and wonder, is my Father really going to take care of me? Does he see what's happening? And then imagine being on a cross where your Father forsakes you, turns his back on you. Yet he did it because he knew the outcome, that God's plan will always prevail. And it's the same for you. You've been waiting. God's plan will prevail. Just pray. Here's the second thing. So stay prayed up, stay fed. Mark 6:31 says that they had not eaten yet. And he tells them, come with me. And then they had to try to feed people. Do you know why they couldn't feed other people? Because they hadn't eaten yet. So they were thinking about themselves. That's why they came and said, Jesus, send these people away. Like, there's nowhere to eat. It's too late. Jesus says, well, you feed them. It was a test. They hadn't eaten, so they didn't know how to feed other people. How are you going to encourage other people to trust in God and to know he's going to be faithful if you haven't eaten yourself? You got to be in the Word of God, understanding his heart and understanding who he is if you're ever going to trust him. You got to be fed up, friends. Not fed up, but fed up. I don't know if that makes sense, you know. Matthew 4:4, Jesus responded to Satan this way when he said to turn these stones into bread. He said, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. In other words, devour it all. Friends, it all matters. And it all will bring you hope in life when you trust in it, if you'll eat it up. You have to devour it. And then third, have faith. Matthew 14:31, immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why do you doubt? Jesus reminds us in Matthew 6:23, look at the birds of the air. They fly about from place to place. They don't worry about where they're going to live or what they're going to eat. And if your heavenly Father, who loves you, does that for the sparrow, how much more will he take care of you? You ever thought about that? That the God of all creation put all of this into motion. Guys, I drove up last Saturday or 2 Saturdays ago by this pond over here, and this ginormous bird. I have a video I can show you at Portillo's right after this. This ginormous bird comes flying out of the water, and I'm like, whoa, what was that? And I pull out my phone. It was an eagle. A bald eagle flew out of our pond right here on the. I was like, whoa, oh. You can see a fish hanging from his talons as it's flying around. I'm like, what are you doing? Stop and eat, okay? It's like fast food, but But I was like so blown away as I watched it, and I was like, wow, how majestic, how beautiful. I mean, this thing would flap its wings once and then just start to soar, and then flap them again, and it would go high, and I'm like, that is amazing. That's one little bird. Think of all of this creation. Yet you're more important than all of it to God. You matter more to him, that he cares about what you think, what you feel, and what you're walking through. You know what breaks my heart? I feel like I always cry with you guys. This is silly. It breaks my heart that some of you feel like you're not good enough. It breaks my heart that some of you have walked through things and you've struggled with them and you feel like, God, I'm being faithful. I go to YA every Thursday. I'm worshiping. I'm reading my Bible. I'm praying. I'm trying to do the right thing. Where are you? What are you doing, God? And you feel like it's because of you or your past. You feel like it's because of something you've done. Here, I wrote this down because during prayer somebody had said it. I don't know what they said during prayer, but I wrote this down. Look, his past didn't disqualify him. It wasn't about if he could get out of the boat. It was about if he would. Was he willing to say, forget everything, forget it all? Because without Jesus, it's just not going to make sense anyway. And so he called out to Jesus, Lord, save me. And despite everything he's ever thought or done or been through, despite the way he felt, despite what was in front of him, despite what he thought about how Jesus didn't save John, despite all of that, Jesus immediately reached down and saved him. Look, you're walking through something tonight. You've been waiting. And you haven't necessarily, you've been trying to pray, you've been trying to read the word, you've been trying to have faith, but somehow you're still in that spot where you're like, I don't know if it's worth it. I don't really know if he's going to do this for me because I've been asking. Can the worship team come on up? I've been asking and wondering and waiting, and I just don't feel it. I just don't know what to do. Maybe it's time to just take the next step. Maybe it's time to step out and say, Lord, just save me. It's the most honest, beautiful prayer you could ever ask. To be in that spot to say, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep trying this. I'm just waiting for the right answer, God, and I'm waiting for you to do something. To get to the spot to say, Lord, I'm desperate now. I'm drowning, and I just need you to save me. And as you do that, I promise you, as you look for Jesus, he looks for you, and he reaches down. He instantaneously gets to the spot that you're at when you're at that spot. And he is able to save you. No, I'm not saying that you're going to come off of this altar in just a moment here and you're like, everything's better. All my problems are gone. Thank you, Jesus. But here's the best part. They had to get back in the boat after he reached him and pulled him out of the water. But you know how he got there? Side by side. He didn't tell Peter, now you walked out here, get back. No, it says he helped him into the boat. See, because sometimes the answers don't come right away, but when you're by yourself, it's a whole lot worse than when you're right beside Jesus when it happens. And in this waiting period of my life, I have to daily stop and remember, I'm not by myself. I'm not my failures in my past. I'm not my feelings about how I feel about myself or about how other people have projected onto me. That's not me. I'm a child of God. And as a child of God, when I call out to him, he reaches down and saves me. My two girls right here, they know this. I would do anything for them. I don't care what it is. You mess with my girls, you mess with me, just so you know, okay, everybody? And I used to be a prison guard, so don't think I'm like, oh, he's an old, weak guy. No. I will fight you. Because those are my girls. Nobody messes with mine. That's how God is. You're his children. Nobody messes with his children. And so when you cry out and say, God, I just need you. Will you save me? Because I can't wait any longer. I can't wonder if you're really going to do this, if you're really going to help me, if you're really going to answer my struggle and my prayer. I can't wonder any longer if these relationships are going to be made right, or if I'm going to be set free from this addiction, or if I'm going to have a restart, a new fresh beginning. I can't wonder any longer, God. I need you to do it right now. In the moment you step out of the boat of sitting there and wondering if it's a ghost and if it's going to happen and if he's really going to do it for you, and you make that bold step to say, I'm walking towards you, Jesus, he runs after you. Can you stand to your feet for a moment? I'm only 6 minutes over. We're good. Will you close your eyes? This is the moment of honesty. It's a moment of confronting things that maybe the person next to you doesn't even know you've been battling. It's a moment of being able to say, I'm done with these things. I'm done feeling like I got to figure it out. I'm done feeling like it's not making sense, and so I got to make it make sense. I'm done wondering if I'm good enough, if he'll see me the same way everybody else does, or that other person does, or if he'll see me as his child. I'm done with those things. I'm stepping out in faith to know I'm going to walk towards the one who I know can do all things. If you've been battling something and you've been wondering, is he going to answer this? Am I going to be okay? Am I going to see resolution? If you've been in a period of waiting for that and and you're done with that waiting, would you just raise your hand? Nobody's looking around. Put it up. Come on. Some people, both hands up right away. Okay, keep that hand up for a second, because here's the next piece. Are you willing to trust Jesus enough to step out and say, I don't care who looks at me and how they look at me. I'm going to put my eyes on Jesus, and I'm going to walk towards him until he reaches down and saves me. Because if you're willing to do that tonight, no more waiting, no more worrying. I want you to step out right now and find somewhere at the front here to get down on your knees and begin to cry out to Jesus. Come on, don't worry about anybody else. Make that step right now and trust Jesus enough to say, will you do it for me? In fact, maybe the only words that you can muster up right now as you think about this is, Lord, save me. Just so you know, I'm coming off the stage and I'm getting on the ground right beside you, because that's where I'm at. I'm done trying to figure it out. I'm done trying to make sense of it all. I'm just going to trust Jesus tonight and say, Lord, save me. And then as you walk away from this altar space tonight, he's going to help you get back into that boat. He's going to walk right alongside of you. But remember, stay prayed up, stay fed, and put your faith in Jesus. Because in this waiting period, if you do those things, you will build a foundation that will help you stand when the storm gets too big. We're just going to sing over you tonight. In fact, if you're not down here, I want you to sing extra loud tonight as we sing this song again. Because these people need to be reminded that there's a God that desperately loves them, sees them, and is right there with them. So let's lift them up as we sing and as these people pray and believe Jesus to save them.